event. We welcome you at the joint conference of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. And today we present the report about tortures and secret detention of civilians in the east of Ukraine. We witnessed a situation that the tortures and secret detention are practiced by both parties in the east of Ukraine. And we have Rachel Denver, Deputy Director of the Europe and Central Asia Division, Human Rights Watch, Denis Krivashev, Deputy Director for Europe and Central Asia, Amnesty International, Tanya Lokshin, Senior Researcher on Europe and Central Asia Human Rights Watch, also Krasimir Yankov will answer your questions. The press conference will last till noon, and then you will have some time for networking and asking questions. The text of our report you can find at the registration point, or you can download it from our website, or alternatively you can send us a request. I'm Oksana Pakalchuk. I'm a director of the Amnesty International in Ukraine, and I would like to give the floor to Ms. Rachel Denver.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to our press conference today. We're here to present a report about a set of human rights violations that have taken place in the context of the armed conflict in eastern Ukraine, about how the warring parties have, in some cases, held civilians in secret detention, held them in total isolation, and in many cases tortured them. So who are we? Who are we, and why are we making these allegations? Why did we decide to do this report together? We are two of the largest human rights organizations in the world, and we work in countries all over the world, including, of course, Ukraine. Everywhere where we work, we use the same methodology, and that's by doing very detailed interviews with people who have directly suffered human rights violations, and also by doing detailed interviews with a very wide variety of people who can give us the fullest possible picture so that we can work to bring an end to human rights violations. And for this report, that's exactly what we did. We did several research trips together to eastern Ukraine, including areas not under control of Russian-backed separatist forces. We interviewed 40 people, victims of abuses, their family members, their lawyers, representatives from international organizations in eastern Ukraine, Ukrainian government officials, representatives of the so-called DNR, and others. So I want to make a couple of things clear. First, this report is about abuses in an armed conflict. And the armed conflict, and that's why it covers abuses on both sides of the conflict. But I want to make very clear that the fact that it covers abuses on both sides of the contact line does not in any way suggest an equality of sides. It also does not suggest that both sides are equally responsible, or that both sides committed equal numbers of violations, or that one side committed more violations than the other. That's not our point. Our point is that this is an armed conflict, it has warring parties, and these parties have committed violations. They need to be investigated. We're asking for what concerns the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian government side. We're asking the Ukrainian government to investigate them, these abuses. We're asking all parties, all warring parties, to investigate the abuses, to put an end to them, to hold people accountable who have committed these abuses, and to always ensure access to places of detention so that these abuses can be prevented. So why did we do this report? Why did we do it together? Well, first because we're talking about more than just 1 or 2 cases. Our report documents 18 cases of arbitrary, prolonged detention of civilians by Ukrainian government authorities and by Russia-backed separatists. Some of these cases were cases of secret detention, were cases of enforced disappearances. Some were in secret detention sites. In almost all of the cases that we documented, the civilians were physically abused, some of it being torture. What all of the cases have in common is that the civilians were held in total isolation. This report talks about 18 cases that took place mostly in 2015 and early 2016, but we don't know how many other cases like that there might be. It's hard for us to know the full scope of the problem. But we can say that after we finalized the report and sent it for publication, we learned about 2 more cases. We know that other organizations have also done investigations into these kinds of abuses. We know that the UN, in its June report, called these practices deeply entrenched. Second, why did we do this report? Well, second, because this is a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Ukraine is in an armed conflict with Russia-backed separatists. It's a war, but I think no one should accept the axiom that à la guerre comme à la guerre. Warring parties have obligations under international human rights law. And one of the most fundamental is that you don't torture, is that you don't hold people in arbitrary detention. Torture, in fact, is a war crime. The third reason we did this report is because in almost all of the 18 cases we looked into, the release of the civilians who were held was at some point discussed in the context of prisoner exchanges. Now, this is not a report about prisoner exchanges between the warring parties. There are other organizations that are involved in that work, that have that as their main task. This is not a report about prisoner exchanges. That's not our mandate. We're not saying that these civilians were detained for the purpose of exchange. We're not saying that. But the pattern that we found gives rise to serious concerns that both the Ukrainian authorities and Russian-backed separatists may both be holding civilians in order to have currency for potential exchanges of prisoners. If they are holding hostages, then that is also a war crime. The fourth reason why we did this report is because civilians, once they're, and this is something I really want you to try to think about, is that civilians, once they are arbitrarily detained and totally isolated, they have no recourse to help or to justice. They are left totally at the mercy of their captors. The abuses that we describe in this report, they're the kinds of abuses that break people's lives and the lives of their families. They leave lasting trauma and lasting scars. And it happens because there's a total legal vacuum, and because secret detention creates a total legal vacuum, and so does total isolation. In fact, one of the people we interviewed for the report told us that when he was in secret detention in Kharkiv, the guards at one point told him, "You do not exist." We felt that that really reflected the true meaning of this legal vacuum. And that's why we chose it for the title of this report. And I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague from Amnesty International, Denis Krivosheyev, who will start maybe by telling you more about the person who told us this. Thank you.
Дякую, Рейчел.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, dear colleagues. I will present the part of our report which deals with the violation of human rights in the governmentally controlled territory. For us, today and tomorrow, this country is important, the destiny of this country and its choice for the human rights, etc. I would like to apologize for my Belarusian accent. Our organizations are not the first two which raised the issue of tortures and secret detentions of civilians. We dealt with this issue in the past, and it is not easy to come back to them once again, but we have to do this once again. I would start from the fact why this topic again attracted our attention. In 2015, we were approached by a woman from Avdiivka. She mentioned that her husband was kidnapped, and she tried to find some help from governmental agencies, and she got just one response, that her husband, Konstantin Beskorovainy, was not detained by law enforcement agencies. In January, Amnesty International had initiated the action of assistance, and a month after issuance of this action, he unexpectedly arrived home, and then he explained how he was detained and tortured in SBU in Kramatorsk, and he was accused in committing the Subversion Act, and later he found himself in SBU prison in Kharkiv, where he for 15 months remained as a prisoner, as a known prisoner, and up to 17 persons were detained in the same prison. The majority of them in different times were exchanged for the prisoners from the other side. 3 weeks after the disappearance of Beskorovainy, Markian Lubkivsky, representative of SBU, stated that they have detained the mad communist from Konstantinivka. His name was not mentioned, but the description clearly points out to Beskorovainy. So we had directed to SBU a letter requesting to explain the relation between the statement of Lubkivsky and official answers from SBU to the letter submitted by the wife. We also requested for a meeting, personal meeting. Later, we met with the representatives of SBU, Presidential Administration, Prosecutor's Office, etc., and we discussed the case of Beskorovainy, and we were informed, among others, that the practice of secret detention was not used, and the statement in line with the in relation to Beskorovainy, the criminal investigation is opened, and we have to wait to the end of this investigation, to the results of it. We would like to hear the official outcomes of the investigation. The investigation have been lasting for many months, but we do not, we have not received the final response. And also we have not received the explanation and comments to Lubkivsky's information. Beskorovine informed us about the pressure which was committed on him, and he was forced to reject from his statements, and also if in the future he would repeal his previous and reject from his previous statements, we again will suspect that he would be forced to do this. The story presented by Beskorovine is not alone. Many other people told us about kidnapping, secret detention in SBU buildings, and about tortures. The SBU serviceman, as they reported, secretly detained them upon release from jail, and or sometimes they were detained by militants and then given to SBU. Beskorovine and some other his friends were unable to use their real names. That's why we did not publish, of course, their names, and only the details with which they agreed. And upon publication, we learned about 2 more cases, and description of the one of them you can find on our website. I would like to emphasize once again, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet with the representatives of Ukrainian authorities, including SBU, and to discuss these issues. The next stage would be objective investigation, and the conclusions in that investigations would bring this topic to the attention of broad public. Now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Tanya Lokshina, who will describe the secret detentions of civilians on the other side in DPR and the LPR. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, colleagues who arrived to today's press conference. I will speak in Russian. My colleagues asked me to present what's going on with the secret detentions in non-controlled territories, and describe what and all the cases which we presented in our report. This is an appeal to the authorities in so-called DPR and LPR, and to the authorities of Russian Federation who has influence on the authorities in DPR and LPR, and we hope that the Russian Federation authorities will be able to present this issue to the attention of people in DPR and LPR who are in authority. Maybe my Russian language will allow them to hear me. So the entire system of detaining people could be seen via one case, which was the beginning, of our report. All the 18 cases which we had studied pointed our attention to one very representative case. In the center of this story, we have a main character, Vadim. He asked not to mention his real name. He is a resident of Donetsk. He is civilian. He is an ordinary man around 40 years of age, and in his commercial business, commercial items, he traveled a lot between controlled and non-controlled territories, and one day in spring 2015, on his way back at a checkpoint near Kurakhova, there was the check of documents, and then a man with a gun, keeping his passport in his hand, went into the bus and wished to make a search, or personal search of Vadim, and they found the document from the illegal referendum, and they start to mock him first. Then his eyes were tied, and he was transported somewhere with no idea what's going on. And then some people whose official alienation remains indifferent for him and unknown for him. They keep asking questions whether he had ties with separatists. He was beaten, he was tortured with the fire of cigarettes, electroshock, and etc. Then from this military base, he was transported again with the tired eyes. He was transported to another military base. He has no idea. He again has no idea where he is, what's going on. And in this base, he spent not 3 days but 6 weeks, and listening to what people say around him, he came to conclusion that he is in the SBU base of Ukraine. There again, he is beaten, he is tortured. He had to recognize that he was a collaborant, that he collaborated with the Russian occupants, and then he was thrown out near Kurakhova, thrown out from the car near Kurakhova with 200 hryvnia in a pocket. So when he was thrown out from the car in very poor situation, he somehow managed to get to Donetsk after more than 6 weeks spent in prison. After tortures, he was so happy that he remained alive. So he managed to get to Donetsk somehow. During all those weeks in detention, he was very poorly fed, he was very poorly maintained. So when he arrived to Donetsk, happily arrived to Donetsk, he decided to submit he decided to file a claim to court against Ukraine, and from Monday he decided to go to the hospital to register all results of all the tortures. But he did not manage to do this before Monday. He was detained and imprisoned by the DPR DPR security service. Because the motivation was that he was in Ukrainian imprisonment, and Donetsk separatists decided that probably he was secretly engaged as an agent by SBU, because obviously he came back alive from that Ukrainian prison. And another 2 months he spent in DPR, in the former Donetsk SBU building. Again, he was tortured, he was mocked there, and after 2 months he was kept happily released. And this illustrates that any person could find himself or herself in similar conditions on both sides along the contact line. This suggests that huge number of illegal detentions done by big number of unknown political groups at the very beginning of the war conflict, and you can see crowds of concerned relatives who come to the SBU building. In the past, they were more numerous, but nevertheless, now there are still many people. In the near the building of the Ministry of State Security in the DPR and the Ministry of State Security of LPR, there are a lot of relatives of those people who disappeared in the territory of former tank plant and in the territory of former tax inspection, where there are illegal prisons organized. There are many people. People are detained there. People are tortured there. During the last 2 years, in the territories of those quasi-states, the quasi-institutions were created, but nevertheless there is legal vacuum, and people there cannot find any protection, any help. In some cases, those people are exchanged for other prisoners. Actually, the collected information allows us to come to a conclusion that they are detained with the purpose to be exchanged later. Now I'm ready to answer your questions about what's going on both sides. Thank you very much for your interventions, and now we'll have Q&A session.
Svetlana Valkova, International Partnership for Human Rights. The question is about the person you told us about, why he was released from Ukrainian captivity. And what would you advise the people of those people who disappeared? where to address. Why he was released from captivity, I can only suggest. I believe, and we spoke with him personally, they kept him, he was beaten, tortured, they tried to get information, but they didn't. And he was a civilian, and maybe they believe that he is useless. And the other side, who suspected that he was recruited and became a spy, so they detained him, but then they released him because maybe they thought that he do not have any information they need. What about relatives? So it is very difficult to say. It is a question of ethics. We cannot say to the relatives of those who disappeared that they should complain despite risks. You should apply official complaints, but as our experience shows, these things, they should be made public. For example, in the case of Ms. Karavaini, he was released after 15 months of illegal detention in the territory of Kharkivsky SBU facility. And maybe this is connected with the Amnesty International action. So we cannot be sure about it, but the timeline shows that maybe there is a connection. So civil society organizations and law enforcement bodies and also European Court and also the use of legislation, but this is a decision for each family. I would like to add the question whether making these things public help, but in our experience, this making things public helps, and also legal advice is important. To find a lawyer who can help to file complaints. Also about SBU in Kharkiv, from several independent sources, we got the information that in February there were 16 people, 15 men and 1 woman, and we believe that this is true. We cannot make it public because we need consent of the families or these people. But people who are there, so maybe some phone call may appear. If you have information, so here you should provide this information if you know something about it. And this list, we provided it to the SBU, to General Prosecutor's Office, to the administration of the President. We won't publish it, but if we get information from the families that they are ready to make this information public, we will do this. One more question. Anna Nemtsova, Daily Beast. You provided the list. And what about the answer? What requests you send to SBU, and what answers did you get? We didn't get the answer, but there was a meeting with SBU in the format of, together with the administration of the President. Also, we wrote the letter, and Biskarnavaina case was mentioned there, and 16 people, so this information was provided. Now, it is too early to speak about the answer, but we expect the answer, and we follow this topic. As to the letter we sent together to SBU at the beginning of the year, when we prepared this report, we also mentioned details of these cases, and we asked questions about illegal detention facilities in the territory of SBU and in such cities as Kharkiv, Mariupol, Also, we said about some cases, and they said no. So SBU has only one detention facility that is registered and legal, and this is a detention facility that is here in Kiev. And they said that they do not detain people in other places, and there is no information about those cases. We spoke about, they do not have information about this Karnavaina case, and they said that they didn't detain any of these people. And today, before this press conference, we had a meeting with the military prosecutor general of Ukraine, and he assured us that the military prosecution office will interview Mr. Karavaini and will take investigative action and will see the place, this unit of SBU, where he was allegedly detained. And what about the other side in Donetsk? We tried to hold the meeting in DPR, but this attempt failed, and we also spoke with Ms. Morozova, and she is the representative of DPR, and she was away because of the Minsk meeting, and we spoke with the representative of hers, and the information that we got, he confirmed that there is an order, a decree of the Cabinet of Ministers of the DPR that gives the right to the special services of DPR in order to establish security, to detain the citizen, the people till for the period of 30 days, and this detention of researcher Igor Kozlov and detention of Kiev blogger. We provided this information in our report. It started with the fact that the officers of security service of DPR came and they detained them. And in Kozlovsky case, he spent incommunicado in 30 days. That is according to decree of the DPR. And then he was sent to detention facilities, and in the framework of Minsk and the leadership of DPR say that he was a producer of arms and Ukrainian spy, and this is very weird, and they want to exchange him. As to second case, the case of the blogger, he was detained and kept in Donetsk for more than 2 months, and as I told already, there the situation there is legal vacuum. So the actions are, there is a vacuum in the legal sphere and people are not protected. And as to the activities of LPR and DPR, in both these self-proclaimed republics, people said that the security services are powerful there. They work outside any system of check and balances, and they do what they like.
I'm a journalist from Germany, and I wanted to know, is there any investigation, an internal investigation from Ukraine, from LNR, DNR, and if not, is there any possibility to investigate these cases external to punish them? Thank you.
As my colleague said, as Denis Krivosheyev said, the Ukrainian authorities have said that they are investigating the case of Mr. Bezkarovayny, and we have received a commitment by the prosecutor's office that they will, just today, when we met with them today, that they will investigate, look into the case and look into all of the allegations that we document in our report. So justice has to start at home. There needs to be a thorough and credible investigation into these allegations here in Ukraine first and foremost. And I think that's what we need to focus on now, on making sure that these investigations happen, in making sure that they're credible, that they're not superficial, that they're not pro forma, make sure that the people who come forward with their complaints, to make sure that they do not suffer any consequences or negative consequences or retribution. In any case, when, sometimes it happens when that authorities promise investigations and then you see the investigations and they're very superficial. And it becomes very obvious when they're superficial. So we and I hope other organizations, first and foremost Ukrainian organizations, will be looking very closely at the results of any investigations to see whether how they were conducted and whether they were conducted in a rigorous and thorough manner.
There are two related issues perhaps to raise. One is, whereas external investigation is usually problematic, external monitoring is always possible. That's what we try to do. You will almost certainly be aware of the visit by the Subcommittee for Prevention of Torture, the UN Subcommittee for Prevention of Torture, which was visiting Ukraine and had to interrupt its visit when it was denied access to some places of detention which it requested or which it attempted to visit. The issue there is, whereas the members of that structure should have access to all places of detention, they should also have access to all places which officially are not such, that are not places of detention, but where people are believed to be detained. And this is crucial. And one of our calls is about providing full access where it should be possible. And secondly, it's deeply disappointing that Ukraine hasn't still ratified the Rome Statute, which deals with the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Code. That said, there was a declaration by Verkhovna Rada. It was formulated in the way calling for the court to investigate one side, but the court now has jurisdiction which enables it to investigate war crimes in the conflict zone, and those would have to be by both sides.
Right, and one of the important issues that we have flagged in the report with regard to the DNR and the LNR is that no international monitors have access to detention facilities in either of the two self-proclaimed republics. Neither the UN, nor the OSCE, nor the International Committee of the Red Cross, like no one. And that makes the situation especially aggravating, and one of the key calls that we are making on local de facto authorities is to allow access to detention facilities for international monitors. That's of key importance.
Чи ще питання або уточнення, колеги? Будь ласка.
Yeah, hello. Sébastien Gobert, I'm a French journalist here. I assume that quite many people didn't want this report to come out. Did you meet any specific problem in making the report? And what kind of cooperation did you have from authorities on both sides? Thank you.
Problems as such, probably not. We certainly have spoken to those who would prefer us to say things differently or not raise certain issues. I was making a reference to this, that we were asked not to make sweeping statements, not to come to conclusions before there is an official conclusion by the investigation. Now, obviously, for such conclusions, we can't wait indefinitely. Where it comes to soliciting information from the sites that matter, we try and do so. And we, as we mentioned, the letter we sent to the SBU, we requested a meeting promptly. We met with them. We weren't granted it, but we were able to talk to them during this visit. That's all very important and fully acknowledged. That's on the Ukrainian side. On the other side, as my colleague mentioned, frankly, we're dealing with a totally different situation. There's nothing to compare, and access to the de facto authorities is much less possible, and any communication with them is much less possible. That said, we will make sure they receive the report and they will be aware of our calls.
I would say that with the other side, quote unquote, the situation has been evolving in recent months, because when Human Rights Watch, for example, worked on a report on military use of schools by the both sides of the armed conflict, a colleague and I traveled to the DNR in September last year, and we had no problems of access to officials whatsoever. They were willing to talk to us. We had fairly high-level meetings there. They were willing to discuss issues, and we got the information that we needed from them, and it all went into the report. In this particular case, I would say the de facto officials in the DNR, or well, especially in the LNR for that matter, were not keen on talking to us at all. We got there, we had access, we were able to do the work, we got it done, but we did not have willing interlocutors from among local de facto officials.
Друзі, ще запитання або уточнення? Будь ласка.
Do you have other questions? Introduce yourself first. Good afternoon. Sergei Stukanov, Громадське Radio. I'm from Donetsk myself, and I had to leave 2 years ago because of occupation by Russian forces. I have a question. I read the story about Vadim once more, about the person who organized separatist referendum also. So after he was released from separatist captivity, he applied to European Court against Ukrainian power against separatists. So he did it as a citizen of Ukraine, or as a citizen of what? Yes, he made it as citizens of Ukraine because he has Ukrainian passport. Do you have other questions or clarifications? If there are no questions, Oksana, please. I would like to thank you once more for coming, for your attention, and we hope that this information will be spread, and if you have the wish to get some contacts, if you want to communicate, please, you can do this. Thank you again.